This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa hails arrival of COVID-19 vaccines as country eases some restrictions. Nigeria secures 41 million COVID-19 vaccines from the African Union. And in Egypt, coping with the coronavirus is a laughing matter. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe, and joining me with a sneak peek of what's coming up in business news is Uche.
Thank you, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Bit. Nigeria says it is getting closer to producing enough rice for local consumption. And Egypt in a $2.3 billion deal with Bombardier Transportation for the construction of 2 new monorails. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you.
Thank you, Uche. Now we begin tonight in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has hailed the arrival of the nation's first batch of COVID-19 vaccines. The drugs landed on Monday as the nation reels from the effects of the disease. Once testing of the batch is complete, the first shots will be administered to health workers. Frontline medical workers have been stretched thin during a second wave of infections. This has led to criticism directed at the government for not securing supplies sooner. In the meantime, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has eased some restrictions imposed due to coronavirus, including lifting an unpopular ban on alcohol sales. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela reports.
Last month, President Cyril Ramaphosa placed the country on an adjusted level 3 lockdown. On that level, restrictions included a complete ban on the sale of alcohol. Most indoor and outdoor gatherings were also prohibited. Now, those restrictions have been relaxed. In a televised national address, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that the average number of daily infections has almost halved, and therefore restrictions can now be softened.
The number of hospital admissions has also been falling. At the peak of the second wave, we recorded over 2,300 hospital admissions in a day. This has now fallen to 295 hospital admissions by the 29th of January.
The president nonetheless cautioned that while this indicates progress in the fight to curb the spread of the virus, the number of transmissions in the country is still relatively high.
Despite the clear progress we have made, the number of new cases is still high, and there is an ever-present danger of a resurgence. It is therefore necessary to maintain the country on coronavirus alert level 3, indicating the continued high risk of transmission.
Ramaphosa, however, acknowledged that the tough restrictions cannot continue for longer than necessary due to their adverse impact on the country's economy.
We are acutely aware that these restrictions have negatively affected businesses and threatened jobs in the hospitality, the tourism, and related industries. That is why we are determined that such restrictions should not continue any longer than is absolutely necessary to contain the pandemic, as well as to minimize the loss of life.
Some of the restrictions that have been relaxed include the opening of public places such as beaches and parks. Faith-based gatherings will now be permitted, all subject to health protocols. The announcement of the eased restrictions follows the arrival of South Africa's first consignment of 1 million COVID-19 vaccines. The president says the vaccines will be made available to every adult living here in South Africa.
We will be putting in place measures to deal with the challenge of undocumented migrants in our country so that, as with all other people, we can properly record and track their vaccination history. It is in the best interests of all that as many of us receive the vaccine as possible.
The president says South Africa is continuing with its mission of sourcing more vaccines from a number of other suppliers. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We earlier spoke to CGTN's Angelo Coppola on the reactions following the relaxation of restrictions. He begins with details on the new directives.
Restaurants and pubs are allowed to stay open until 10 o'clock, and they've got to allow people to leave then so that they can get home before curfew. The sale of alcohol by licensed premises for on-site consumption is now allowed, and that's for places like restaurants and taverns. So we know that's in place, and that's for the whole week from 10 a.m. till 10 p.m. Then the faith-based gatherings are allowed to take place again, subject to some health protocols. In other words, the 50 people limit is still in place for indoors, and then 100 people for outdoors. So that's been reinstituted. And then also the public places such as beaches, dams, rivers, parks, and public swimming pools are now open as well for people to go and attend. Of course, again, subject to some health protocols. And then we understand that the duty-free shops and places like wineries and wine farms, microbreweries and micro-distillers will also be able to sell alcohol for off-site consumption. And that's during their normal licensed hours. So people are upbeat about it. They are happy about it. They're curious about why there was a lockdown in the first place and the logic behind it. And there are at least 2 court cases that are underway that kind of are moot now because the alcohol ban's been lifted. But SAB Miller and Vinpro are still taking government to court because they're challenging the legality of the ban on alcohol sales during this hard lockdown that we've just gone through right now.
South Africa and Egypt will become the first African countries to administer the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, followed by Kenya. The nations on the continent may also opt for these shots since it can be stored at normal refrigerator temperatures. But what do we know about the AstraZeneca vaccine? CGTN's Enoch Sekolia takes a look.
It was hailed as a vaccine for the world, and Kenya has joined the queue of countries set to get the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine by mid-February. The vaccine is more affordable compared to other jabs manufactured by Western pharmaceutical companies. The East African country is expecting to roll out its vaccination program before the end of this month, free of charge for its citizens. But priority will be given to frontline workers and the most vulnerable. Kenya has reported over 1,700 deaths since the first case was detected in March last year. Hospitals and emergency services are currently dealing with a second wave of infections. There are concerns that infrastructure in Africa will not be able to support the distribution of vaccines that require ultra-cold temperatures like the Pfizer and Moderna shots. But the AstraZeneca jab can be stored and transported at normal fridge temperatures. Good news for poorer parts of the world. The vaccine was developed by the UK's Oxford University and pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca. Once given the jab, the patient's immune system starts to make antibodies, making it ready to attack any COVID-19 infections. During clinical trials, none of the participants receiving the actual vaccine developed severe COVID-19 or had to receive hospital treatment. Now, there is the question of whether the vaccine should be administered to people aged 60 years and above. Germany is set to limit AstraZeneca jab to those below 65 years of age. It says there is insufficient data over its efficacy for older people. But the UK scientists are sticking to their decision to have people aged above 65 years immunized as well. Enoch Sekolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Staying on the issue of inoculation, Zimbabwe will soon have access to Chinese COVID-19 vaccines. China's ambassador to Zimbabwe, Guo Xiaochun, has tweeted that it will be one of the first 14 countries to receive the doses. Zimbabwe has reported a total of more than 33,500 infections, but about 60% of its confirmed cases and over 2/3 of coronavirus deaths were recorded since January 1st. The Chinese Foreign Ministry says Beijing plans to help 38 more developing countries acquire vaccines. At the same time, Zimbabwe's government has mobilized $100 million for COVID-19 vaccines. The country's finance ministry said it will procure 10 million doses, which will inoculate 60% of the country's population. Peninah Karibe has more on that.
A Treasury official said a 2020 budget surplus and some 2021 tax revenues will be redirected to pay for the vaccine doses. While welcoming the news, frontline workers are worried that the country's response may fail to keep pace with the rampaging pandemic.
We can actually say we are now behind, because by now we expect to start noticing results from those countries that actually started the vaccination process. So if we have not started now, and we expect at least 6 weeks to notice effects of the vaccine, the results, the good results of the vaccine, then it means we are still far from over.
Authorities are waiting on expert advice to guide the next course of action.
This government is preparing as hard as it can. We have, as I indicated before, meticulously looking at our situation, our environment. We did some assessments, October, November, to see where we are, to identify the gaps and begin to plug those gaps. And that's exactly what we're doing with our technical teams and so on. We've put in a strategic framework that really guides us, that looks at, how do we prioritize, how do we resource mobilize, how do we do advocacy, communicate with the communities, and so all that we are continuing to work.
The government is keeping all options on the table, which means it has not chosen just one vaccine to go with. It says it's taken the strategic decision because of the virulence of the second wave of COVID-19, which compels it not to keep all its eggs in one basket. It's not clear when the vaccine purchase is expected. Medical experts have recommended ample training for those who will be administering them.
How it is done, how it is transported, if it needs cold chain management, where we need to maintain it frozen, then we have to make sure that we have enough refrigeration, we have to make sure we have enough supply, we have to make sure we have generators in the rural areas.
Apart from the national purse, Zimbabwe can also call on funds pledged by the business community to help procure vaccines. Peninah Karibe, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
In West Africa, Nigeria has ordered 41 million doses of vaccines from the African Union. The government said this is part of its plans to vaccinate at least 70% of its more than 200 million population by 2022. Our correspondent Phili Haza reports from Abuja.
The head of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, Faisal Shuaib, says Nigeria's previous request for 10 million doses through the African Union has been increased fourfold. He says the 41 million doses are a combination of Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines. Faisal Shuaib says the doses are meant to arrive in the country by the end of April, as the government is considering funding support from various alternatives, including through the African Export-Import Bank. More vaccines from Russia and India are also being considered. 270 million COVID-19 vaccine doses were initially secured by the African Union for all its member states, including Nigeria, and the bloc says another 400 million are on its way. The NPHCDA chief says the new batch of vaccines will replace plans for an earlier batch of 100,000 doses initially expected to arrive in February, which he says would have been grossly inadequate. Nigeria plans to vaccinate at least 40% of its entire population this year and another 30% in 2022. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
14 minutes into the hour, you're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up. Myanmar Army Chief says military takeover was inevitable. And the UN calls for long-term solutions to the IDP situation in Somalia's Baidoa city.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent. to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Myanmar's top general, who seized control of the government in a coup, says it was inevitable the military would step in after elections that returned Aung San Suu Kyi to power. Speaking during the first meeting of the new military junta, General Min Aung Hlaing said he had been driven to take power due to what he termed as fraud that allegedly happened in last year's elections. This is a claim that the country's election regulator has dismissed. Meanwhile, Myanmar has closed its international airport in Yangon. Reuters cited the airport's manager as saying that the airport is closed until May and gave no reason for its closure. The country remained calm and under heavy security on Tuesday, a day after the military seized power ahead of the reopening of a newly elected parliament. The future of the country's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, isn't clear as the international community considers how it will respond to the military's takeover of government. Martin Lowe tells us what to expect next.
The question for many is what happens now to Aung San Suu Kyi. The de facto leader of Myanmar's civilian government was taken into custody as the military takeover unfolded. Her whereabouts were unclear, as were those of Myanmar's president, Win Myint.
Aung San Suu Kyi, our leader, was arrested by the military. We are sorry and sad. We urge people around the world, please stand with Aung San Suu Kyi and help.
A number of government leaders, regional and state chief ministers were released after a day's detention. The US has threatened to reinstate sanctions against the country, which were only recently lifted after decades of military rule. The takeover was also condemned by the UN, the UK and the EU. Sources inside Myanmar say the military will know that sanctions are unavoidable, but will have little concern over Western actions. They will be far more interested in how China and other Asian nations react. Ms. Suu Kyi spent almost 15 years in detention for opposing military rule. Her party, the National League for Democracy, has called for her immediate release. The UN is due to hold an emergency meeting. With soldiers on the streets, Myanmar so far remains calm. Some banks have reopened after closing following the takeover, but there are fears instability will damage the economy.
Business was slow because of COVID, and now there is political conflict. It is hard to make a living.
The military has refused to accept the results of a November election, in which Ms. Suu Kyi's party won a landslide victory, and has declared a year-long state of emergency. Martin Lowe, CGTN.
President Joe Biden has ordered a review of U.S. policy towards the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In a television interview today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the DPRK is a problem that has been worsening through past U.S. administrations. He He said Biden wants him to make sure that the U.S. is using the most effective tools to advance the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. These so-called tools could include additional sanctions, coordination and cooperation with allies and partners, as well as diplomatic incentives. A wildfire on the fringes of Australia's fourth largest city, Perth, has destroyed several homes and forced emergency evacuations. The fire is currently 7,000 hectares in size, with a perimeter of around 75 kilometers. Firefighters were said to be working in extremely volatile conditions, with temperatures set to hit 37 degrees Celsius. It comes just days after the West Coast city of 2 million residents entered a coronavirus lockdown. Strong winds overnight fanned the fires. Authorities have urged residents to head to the nearest evacuation center despite the lockdown. The United Nations is engaged in a 5-day meeting this week where Libyan delegates are voting for the country's interim executive authority. Delegates are selecting a prime minister and the 3 members of a presidency council from a pool of 45 candidates. Adel Mahrui reports.
In Switzerland, 75 Libyans from the UN-led political dialogue are gathering to select the politicians who will lead them in the next period. The aim is to form the nation's first unity government, which should end its administrative division, and create a presidency council that represents all regions.
I am encouraged by the high number of nominations that you put forward, and I welcome the diversity represented by the pool of candidates who are drawn from all political and social components of the Libyan society. It is a positive sign that this process, your process, has inspired a high degree of buy-in and enthusiasm.
45 candidates are running for the 4 top positions. These temporary leaders must take Libya to elections this December. Though the United Nations has announced no restrictions, participants say the heads of the council and the government will come from different regions.
What has been agreed upon is that the government gets led by the Western region while the Presidency Council by the East. Now we're seeing Western politicians being nominated for the presidency. I think it's surprising and creates confusion and sparks mistrust.
This project is not about power sharing or dividing the cake. Rather, it is to form a temporary government composed of patriots who agree to shoulder and to share the responsibility to put Libyan sovereignty and the security, prosperity, and welfare of the Libyan people above narrow interests and far from the specter of foreign interference.
On the first day of the selection process, the UN asked all candidates running for the Presidency Council presented their vision for Libya. One of the top candidates on the list, Aqila Saleh, the Speaker of the Eastern-based Parliament, told the electors he will resign from Parliament only if selected for a new post.
There are concerns about what's next. Saleh has asked to resign from the parliament while running for the Presidency Council. On the contrary, all those from the Western-based government have kept their positions. This is a discrepancy, and no one knows what possible tricks could be played at this stage.
After the 2015 Khirat agreement, many of the Eastern-based politicians felt ignored when the United Nations directed its support to the government of national accord. Many among them still feared that this round of selection could once again find them marginalized. A fair distribution in this week's vote could finally put an end to these doubts. Adel Mahrui, CGTN, Cairo.
In Somalia, officials from the United Nations are calling for long-term solutions for internally displaced persons. Thousands affected by violence, drought and flooding have fled to hundreds of camps. Here's CGTN's Daniela Pearson with that story.
In Somalia's southwest state alone, there are some 350 camps for the internally displaced. Fatuma Isaac Mohammed's life is a daily struggle with her 10 children. Like many others at Hatafo camp, Fatuma fled from fighting and violence.
This is not our land, and we don't know how long we will be here. Our problems and needs in this camp are many, but we desperately need food and water. To survive, I occasionally do manual jobs around this camp to give me an income. However, it is irregular and not sufficient for upkeep. We have so many problems. We have nothing to eat, no bedding, water, and nowhere to return to, or even a job. We are simply idle, and these children want a better life, and I have nothing to offer them. That is my message.
Thousands across camps like Atafo have also been displaced by droughts and floods, which have deprived them of both their home and their livelihoods. United Nations officials visited Baidoa, where the camp is located, to check out the situation on the ground.
It is a unique privilege to visit Baidoa again and also visit the internally displaced communities around the city, and to have an exchange with the speaker about how we could work together to find durable solutions to some of the chronic humanitarian and development challenges that the Southwest state is facing.
The UN is working with the federal government of Somalia to implement a new 3-year project which exclusively targets IDPs.
We discussed IDPs living in Baidoa and how their lives could be improved. We had a very fruitful meeting in which we agreed on how best to address the humanitarian situation in the southwest state of Somalia.
The joint project seeks to scale up durable solutions for displaced persons in Baidoa, as well as other cities experiencing the same challenges. It is expected to be launched in early 2021. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Ahmed Abubakar Ahmed is the Director General of the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs in the federal government of Somalia, and he paints a picture of the situation on the ground.
As you know, due to the disasters in Somalia, either man-made disasters like civil war and conflict, or natural disasters like drought and floods, around 2 million Somali people are internally displaced in around 2,000 IDP sites, which is self-settled IDPs in different areas in the country, including urban areas and urban areas. And according to the detailed site assessment that made by Camp Coordination and Camp Management Cluster, 74% of these camps are not in government buildings, but they are private buildings. So, and these people are living in very poor living conditions, and they have lacking all basic needs, including food, nutrition, water, and sanitation. So many these people, they is not going back to their homes because they lost their livelihood activities, and they are independent to the humanitarian services. So many UN agencies and NGOs, also some Arab and Muslim countries agencies, are helping these people to deliver some limited humanitarian services. And because of limited access of this humanitarian service, many people, they now prone to female or very poor health and nutrition conditions. To enable these people to have a resilient livelihood is the most important step to solve this displacement, and to help with them financially, to support them create their own income generations, or to help with them have sustainable livelihood situations.
All right, let's now catch up with the day's business news, and for that we cross over to Uche.
Thank you, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria says it's getting closer to producing enough rice for local consumption. And Egypt in a $2.3 billion deal with Bombardier Transportation for the construction of 2 new monorails.
taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
And let's start off in Nigeria. The country says it is close to self-sufficiency in rice production, with current output at nearly 7 million metric tons a year. But of course, experts say that more needs to be done to close the gap between production and consumption. Here's CGTN's Phili Haza with more from Abuja.
Blessed Wakama has been selling rice at this retail market in Abuja for more than a decade. He says the sales of local rice have improved within the past 5 years.
We've seen more people invest in the production of local rice. I think it's largely because the government has since restricted foreign rice importation.
According to the Ministry of Agriculture, the gap between the country's rice production and what it consumes yearly is now only 500,000 metric tons. The government has banned rice imports across land borders for 5 years and kept a heavy 70% tariff on imports coming through ports. Through various initiatives, the government has increased credit facilities to local farmers. But experts say more needs to be done for Nigeria to attain self-sufficiency in rice production.
Besides even getting funding into this space, we still have to face the issue of farmers-herders clash, that is even setting us even back. So we need to address a number of issues before we get to that point where we say we are self-sufficient. We need to develop infrastructure, roads, transport system that can ship this product from point of production to where it will be sold and consumed at the least cost.
The Rice Processors Association of Nigeria has also urged the government to criminalize the sale of foreign rice in the country. They allege that the presence of foreign rice in the market will jeopardize the efforts of the government in promoting local rice consumption. President Buhari has expressed optimism that with ongoing interventions by his administration, local rice production will continue to increase, and in no time the markets will be flooded with quality local rice, enough for the entire populace. Experts say that's something that could have huge economic implications for the country.
Right now we consume a lot of rice, and if we're able to scale up production to the point that we become self-sufficient, that means we're able to produce more than we need and have excess to ship out, then, FX will just flow into the country, and then, we would have got to the promised land at that point.
And if Nigeria gets to that point, rice dealers like Blessed could make better sales of local rice and even export some to customers in other parts of the world. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, a consortium led by Bombardier Transportation has signed a $2.3 billion deal with the government to build 2 new monorails in the country. The UK Export Fund is financing the project that will be constructed in Egypt's capital, and it is expected to be completed in 2 years. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
This is the latest deal in the multi-billion-dollar mega project to overhaul Egypt's railway sector. The agreement is for 2 lines. One is a 65-kilometer line from 6th of October City, west of Cairo, to downtown Giza. The second is a 45-kilometer route from downtown Cairo to the new capital. The monorail will cut the trip's duration by half.
It's expected to transport nearly 350,000 passengers a day. The monorail is a better option than cars, taxis, and buses, because it's disconnected from traffic. It operates above the ground on concrete columns which are light structures that are cheaper to construct than the underground rail and is also environmentally friendly.
Canada's Bombardier will build the monorail carriages, the rail and the maintenance with a $2.23 billion financing from the UK Export Fund. This is the largest financing the UKEF has ever provided overseas and is also the first since 2008.
It's an opportunity to develop economic relations with the UK. The timing of this deal is significant amid the acute recession in Europe due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So finding investment opportunities outside of the recession-hit Europe is more important for them at this point than high profits. Therefore, you can strike good finance deals with favorable facilitated repayment options.
The $4.5 billion monorail project will be connected to the country's first electric train, constructed by China to link the capital to major cities. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And turning our attention to China-U.S. relations now, and Yang Jiechi, director of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee and China's former ambassador to the United States, has called for restoration of a constructive relationship between Washington and Beijing. Here's CGTN's Dai Kai reporting.
As the new U.S. administration moved into the White House nearly 2 weeks ago, China's top diplomat says the relationship between China and the U.S. stands at a defining moment.
China and the United States are the world's two largest economies, as well as prominent members of the UN Security Council. Effective cooperation between the two has a direct bearing on the well-being of all people, as well as peace, development, and global prosperity.
Yan said for the past few years, the Trump administration adopted misguided policies against China, plunging the relationship into its most difficult period since the establishment of the diplomatic ties. He added attempts from the U.S. side seeking decoupling and a potential Cold War have seriously damaged China-U.S. ties and fundamental interests. At this critical juncture, Yan said it's time for the two countries' relationship to get on a more predictable and constructive track.
China is prepared to work with the United States to move the relationship forward along the track of no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation for the well-being of both countries and peoples.
Yan said opening up has been the key driving force behind China's rapid development, and the country will remain fully committed to that fundamental policy. In the meantime, he also pointed out that China will continue to stand firm to defend its sovereignty, security, and development interests. Dakai CGTN, Beijing.
Now, continued uncertainty in Japan over the fate of this summer's Olympics is weighing heavy on the country's economy. Experts now say it is placed added pressure on businesses after quite a disruptive year. Here's CGTN's Grace Lee with more.
Well, many of these businesses have been preparing for the upcoming Olympic Games for the past few years, and even with the postponement, they've kept their hopes high and have continued on with their plans, especially with the International Olympics Committee and the Japanese government both saying that there is no plan B and that the Olympics will go ahead as scheduled in July. But businesses have been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic, and there are fears that this second state of emergency will mean further losses. The recovery that had been forecasted for 2021 remains very fragile. There are still many uncertainties surrounding the Olympics as well. One of the biggest questions being, will there be international spectators? Without them, Japan will be taking a $23 billion hit. We spoke with a tourism association based out of Nikko, just north of Tokyo, who gave us a very grim outlook of what's been happening there.
We have over 700 members for our association. Most of them are hotels and Japanese traditional inns. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many of them had no choice but to shut down. Currently, for the weekdays, almost 70 to 80% of the hotels are closed. Once safety is ensured, we want customers to come and visit us and for the Olympics to be held. But for that to happen, the pandemic needs to be under control for Japan and the rest of the world. We were originally expecting a lot of visitors with the Olympics, but with the current situation, safety comes first.
Well, we did see in a recent poll by NHK, Japan's national broadcaster, that about 60% of the companies that they surveyed are hoping that the Olympics will be held as scheduled. Now, that's in comparison to about 80% of the general public that showed in several polls recently that they don't want the Olympics to go ahead as planned. That stark difference does tell us that most Japanese companies are hoping that the Olympics will be able to deliver some much-needed relief to Japan's economy in 2021.
Now, at this year's virtual Davos, climate change was near the top of the agenda. One way to reduce carbon emissions is planting trees, but there's still concern among scientists that it's not being done right, and that can harm the environment. Here's Jemima Walker taking a look.
Trees are one of nature's great solutions to a man-made problem. But it's not as simple as digging a hole and hoping for the best. That's why scientists have come up with 10 golden rules for tree planting. A beech like this takes seconds to chop down, but years to grow. That's why rule number 1 is protect existing forests first. Old trees are better at soaking up carbon and they're more resilient. The next rule is involve local communities in tree planting initiatives. They're the ones who are most likely to benefit, so they'll also be most likely to be invested in making sure seeds take root. And make sure biodiversity is maximised. Scientists here at Kew say this is a crucial decade for tree planting.
Well, everyone knows that there's a huge crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss at the moment. And I think tree planting is widely seen as an answer to all these problems. And as a result, there are a huge number of global initiatives to plant trees across the world. And in fact, one of them aims to reforest an area that is larger than the size of India. So it's really important we get it right.
Can planting trees really stop climate change?
Planting trees can certainly go a long way towards capturing carbon, thus reducing the carbon in the atmosphere, and that will help with the global greenhouse effect. But it's not the only answer, and it can't solve the problem on its own. So tree planting must be accompanied with massive reductions in global carbon emissions, and without that we're not going to get on top of the climate problem.
There are some bold tree planting initiatives all around the world. China plans to plant 35 million hectares of trees in the north of the country by 2050. Banks and nations recently pledged more than $14 billion to accelerate a Great Green Wall across Africa. But the reality is deforestation is happening at pace. Forests are often called the lungs of the earth, and scientists say we need to do more to keep them breathing. Jemima Walker, CGTN in Kew, London.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, the African mining indaba kicks off virtually as the sector seeks to overcome the fallout of the coronavirus pandemic. We'll bring you more on that at top of the hour. For now, it's back to Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live, coming up after the break. We'll take you to Egypt, where coping with the coronavirus is a laughing matter.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
It hasn't been all doom and gloom amid the coronavirus pandemic. One wellness coach has a unique way of killing this stress through laughter, and Egyptians are taking it up and laughing their troubles away.
These Cairo residents are gathered here for yet another session of yoga, but it is a different one.
Arms.
Their German wellness coach, Ute Devika, shows them how to sit back and, well, laugh.
The first day I came to the coaching academy in London, a woman sat next to me and said, "You look exactly like my sister." And I said, "Wow, what did your sister do?" And she said, "My sister is a happiness facilitator." And I was like, these two words really made it like happiness facilitator. How good is that? How do you facilitate happiness? And she told me she does laughter yoga.
As the coronavirus pandemic continues to present many with tough choices in life, Devika is teaching her clients the value of hope.
Laughter yoga is the best way to address the problems that we have now collectively all over the world. There is a lot of depression, there is a lot of anxiety, and people feel so super stressed. Laughter changes the biochemistry within minutes. We are swamped with endorphins and serotonin and happy maker hormones, and it changes our body and our well-being in 3 minutes. So laughter is the solution to the problems we have right now.
While many usually draw their laughter from humorous situations or talk, these residents are learning the art of laughing for no reason and at nothing in particular.
I honestly really enjoyed my day. Today, I realized that laughter without a cause doesn't have to be inappropriate. Laughter in this way really brings the human senses to life. This was the first time I realized that we laugh from our stomachs, we laugh from our hearts, we laugh from our fingertips, we laugh from our legs, and we laugh at ourselves.
The attendees use different laughing exercises, such as pretending to laugh at a joke on the phone, or dancing, clapping, as well as chanting rhymes. Some just laugh at their colleagues who are struggling to generate their laughter.
I love strange things. I like to try anything that is new, but I don't find this strange. I don't feel strange doing it. On the contrary, it brings people back to their nature, which is childhood and innocence. Today, we are exactly like children.
As they generate their happiness, it is clear that not even coronavirus can withstand the power of laughter. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
Coming up in sports. Guinea sets their eyes on reaching the final, but have neighbours and rivals Mali as their obstacle.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the track,